The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Underdog. Two guests today. Mike Leone up first, Sia Nejad a little bit later on, talking NFL, maybe some golf bets towards the very end of the show. Of course, we are live, so you smash the like button to the channel. Share the show around. If you're streaming it live on X, now that I have my account back, which is just terrific news. And you can always hit the time codes after the fact. Once I know where stuff happens, I will put those back in. If you want to jump around from establishTheRun.com, and a guy who loves to run now, Mike Leone, what's up, dude?
Not too much, man. Pretty excited for this weekend. Huge weekend as a Bills fan.
Did you instantly regret agreeing to do this before the Bills game last week, knowing that you were going to come on and the Bills might not be playing?
I did, because it would have been tough to show up here and talk about Baltimore, KC.
Yeah. So where's your nervousness level at right now? I assume it's a 10 out of 10.
I say like 8 out of 10. I was more nervous for last week than this week. I don't know if that's probably wrong, given that we're 0-3 against KC in the playoffs, and that's the hurdle we need to get over. But looking at just this year, I thought Baltimore was more of a challenge, even having them at home and being on the road versus KC.
Well, the Bills probably should have lost last week, shouldn't they?
I mean, they had the turnover variance on their side, and the Mark Andrews drops, he's on their side. So it's tough to say how much credit you give the Bills defense for causing the turnovers or not. But they definitely ran a little pure, played a little conservative in that second half, and it almost bit them.
Do you think that's something that's going to happen with the Chiefs? Because that's basically how the Bills ran their offense in the second half last week against Baltimore. Is essentially what KC does on every drive, except KC is better at doing that sort of offense.
And KC puts it in Mahomes' hands a little bit more. So I'm a little worried they've been so successful running the first 2 weeks of the playoffs that they're going to like overdo it. Like, it's part of who they are. And if they're going to be willing to go for it on every fourth and short, it makes a little bit more sense. But at the end of the day, I want the ball in Allen's hands as much as possible. So I'm definitely a little bit concerned they're going to overcook it in the run game because of the success the last 2 weeks.
Well, one thing that I've pointed out about the Bills offense, it didn't really hurt them last week because they were able to score so early once they actually started. Oh, I mean, they were able to run the ball so well. But I'm always shocked that they don't get Josh going on the ground earlier in games more than they do, or even give him like pass run options. Like, it seems like Jaden Daniels gets that a lot, because people were pointing out on fourth down a lot 2 weeks ago against the Buccaneers, and even last week against the Lions. These short fourth down situations are like, man, why wouldn't you just run Daniels? He's just rolling out and passing. Pretty sure those are, you can roll out if you can easily get the first down, run for it. If not, and they have it guarded, then you're going to have to pass. Like, I don't feel like the Bills do that enough when they commit to running with Josh in these short yardage situations. If it's not like the actual sneak, which is very effective, and they run these QB draws, like, why not just give him the option to do that? He's better on the move anyway.
Yeah, I hope they give him some more option stuff, but they do seem to save it for critical times. To your question about why they don't do it earlier in the game, I think they're kind of saving it for when they really need it. He is one of the best short yardage, running backs that you can have in the NFL in terms of success rate and whatnot. So would like to see some more of the run pass option, but I'm okay. I want to see them do the tush push like anytime it's close, though. They get like 2 yards on that thing. I thought they should have done it.
Yes.
They had 3rd and goal at the 2. We were saying just do it 2 times in a row, and they're not going to stop it.
So this is an argument that, because Paul was here, and Paul obviously a big Bills fan. I was watching the game at home, and then Cuss chimes in about how like he didn't agree with the call, and I didn't agree with it either. Like, why are you trying to run it at a shotgun? Why not just get under center? If they stuff you, whatever, do it again. It may have been stopped once. It has not been stopped 2 times in a row yet. And then you ice the game away, and he was all over the map with this stuff. It's like, well, you can't do that. They know it's coming. Like, everyone knows the tush push is coming. No one can stop it.
Yeah, there's times when they run that, they get like 3 yards too. It's not like they're limited to getting just the 1 yard. So they could have scored the first time running it from the 2-yard line. Josh is usually pretty good too about picking his spot. He doesn't just slam it right in the middle. He'll kind of see what the defense is doing. So even if they're prepared, if everybody just dives into the middle, he'll generally kind of sneak around and work it. So I'm just a proponent of doing it. I mean, be like the Eagles, be obnoxious about it. Anytime it's remotely close, tush push, get the first down, keep it going.
Is there anyone in the receiving game that you can see getting going against the Chiefs? Because this is becoming, it's not a problem. They keep winning. And if they keep winning, then obviously it's never going to be a problem. But is Amari Cooper dead? Is he weekend at Bernie out there?
I was gonna say Amari Cooper is a guy I could see them leaning on a bit more this week. I think he's their most talented receiver in any sort of one-on-one situation. And if they do end up throwing a bit more and just or they get a negative game script and they need someone to really win out on the boundary, it's got to be Amari. So he's the guy I'm looking for. I expect them to try and utilize the tight ends a ton in this game. I was looking at Kincaid's targets. As bad as it's been the last 2 weeks, I didn't realize to close the regular season, he basically had 10 straight games with at least 5 targets before the blowout win against the Jets towards the end of the season. So I think he's going to be more of a factor than he's been the first 2 weeks of the playoffs.
Well, how many of those games were without Knox? Because wasn't Knox out for an extended period of time?
He was, but the route share for him has never really jumped that high. I mean, over the course of the season, I think he's got like an 18% target share on 58% route share, and he's at 54% routes through the first 2 weeks. So him and Knox split evenly last week. The thing that's killing him, I mean, the target per route run isn't good. Shakir's been dominating there, but just this super run heavy game plan just hasn't, suited him. So the Bills are the other thing I looked at too when I was, prepping for our DFS stuff. But I always say the Bills are tough to predict, and I wanted to actually look at some numbers on that. And when I say tough to predict, I mean in terms of their play calling week to week. But if you look at their standard deviation of like pass rate over expectation, they are one of the most volatile teams in terms of their pass rate over expectation. And the teams that are more volatile are teams that like switch quarterbacks throughout the season. So that's why their PROEs all over the map. So you just really don't know on any given week exactly what the game plan is going to be.
So if you are prepping for DFS, like what are you looking at? Like where is the soft spot this week? Even on the 2-game slate, not even just for Showdown. Showdown can be kind of a crapshoot that way. And a 2-game slate's not going to be substantially different. But if I was to guess where points were going to be scored, it's probably between these two teams. I mean, if Washington wins, Washington score a bunch of points on Philly, and that probably means that Philly's like dead in the water. I don't think that's going to happen. But that's like one of the scenarios that I can see. But the other way, I could see Bills Chiefs being a shootout.
Yeah, I mean, the thing Drew and I were talking about when we did establishing Millie, the wide receiver scores on this 2-game slate could be so ugly. Like you said, if Philly dominates that game, they go super run heavy, and you take out AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, and then Washington's just not able to be successful. One of the games that Washington played Philly, the 2 leading wide receivers were, I think, like McLaurin and Zacchaeus each had like 1 catch for 10 yards, and then Zach Ertz had a pretty big game. So wide receiver scores could definitely be ugly, and you could load up on the receivers in the KC Buffalo game. I know I was talking about Kincaid, but I do think Knox will be out there, and there's nobody else sub 3K on the entire slate. I don't think Knox is going to score a lot of points, but he does kind of unlock some things, and it doesn't seem like he's going to carry too much ownership.
Is there any random Chiefs receiver that you think you would go to? Because I would expect their offense to look a lot like it did against Houston's, where they're going to come out, they're going to try to pound Pacheco, and that like may work, it might not work. If he catches a few passes, that would be nice, and not just have them bounce off the center of his hands. That wasn't a good look. Mahomes is going to run. I saw his rushing prop was 4.5. That's not bad.
No, the slate is so weird though that Hollywood Brown coming off this awesome 0-catch game is one of the chalkiest wide receivers just because he's out there running routes and there's not really too many cheap receivers. The one guy in KC who's not going to get played will be DeAndre Hopkins. So if you think he gets more involved, I'm a little bit skeptical at this point. They kind of did their normal, like even Juju Smith-Schuster was still out there running routes. Like they are who they are. I think sometimes we want these teams in the playoffs to condense. But we've seen it with the KC wide receivers. They're not going to condense. They're just going to do their thing. We've seen it with the Buffalo running backs too. I mean, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, they're important pieces to the Bills ground game, or Ty Johnson just as a pass catching back. So yeah, sometimes these teams don't play the way we want them to. But yeah, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be clearly the lowest owned of the main Chiefs wide receivers.
His receiving prop right now, I'm looking at on Underdog. Let me pull it up. It was 22.5. I want to see if it has shifted at all. I think it was before last week. He had beat this number in every game as a Chief.
Yeah, I know it's kind of crazy that the market's like actually gone the other way of the narrative of like they're saving him for the playoffs. But really, when you start giving Kelsey more of a playoff target share, and then Hollywood Brown's targets per route run was so strong in the limited snaps he played, and his route share is coming up. I mean, someone's got to get squeezed. You can't bump all of these guys on narratives. You just start, you can only have 100% of the pass attempts go somewhere. So he's definitely the one that's been getting squeezed.
So let me flip it back to you this way. I mean, you're very familiar with the Bills. How's their defense looking in terms of health? Is there anyone that got banged up last week that's not playing, that might play? What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, so Tyler Rapp, safety, looks like he's not going to play. Last I looked, he's been DMP. He was carted off last week. That's a loss. Christian Benford, their corner, is in concussion protocol. He's been limited at practice each of the first 2 days. I think he's on track to clear. That's a big one. Teron Johnson, their nickel corner, who's really good, got banged up. He's done one full practice and then limited practice yesterday. Milano is limited. So they got a few really important guys on the injury report. But I think most of them are going to end up playing except for Rapp.
Matthew Messing in the chat says the teams throw more running back screens against Buffalo than anyone else. But how can you pick and choose which of those KC backs is actually going to catch the ball?
Yeah, Bills do inflate running back target share. We've seen that kind of all season long, whether it's in the screen game or just checkdowns. Yeah, we've been debating the Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco shares. That's another narrative that was kind of busted that like once the playoffs came, they would go back to Pacheco. But I just don't think he's still fully himself coming back from injury. The carries were definitely in favor of Hunt last week. He's the one who's getting the short yardage carries. So if you're taking like game theory out of it, Hunt is the back I'd rather have, just a lot better bet for a touchdown and probably more likely to see most of the carries. But yeah, I think when you bring ownership into play, I think that's the way most of the field is going to see it, from a DFS perspective, at least.
I was thinking from a prop perspective, like just looking on underdog. I think that there's everyone, if we can try to pick right on Kansas City and even Buffalo, if we know where the ball is going to go in that game, if we can try to figure that out a little bit, I think there's some like great value here. Like Kareem Hunt, 1.5 receptions is juiced to the under right now. Like you can get the higher at 1.12 receiving yards, 6.5 for Kareem Hunt. If we think that he's the one who's going to be out there, even in passing situations, then that's seeming pretty easy on that front. If it's P. Ryan, if they fall behind, he's at 1.5 receptions. He's at 7.5 yards. Or maybe they just try to start with Pacheco again, and maybe he looks better this week. But you can, I know that they sold out to stop Derrick Henry last week, but I still feel like you can run on Buffalo.
Yeah, you can run on them a little bit. They're a little bit smaller up front, and it'll be interesting to see what their defensive strategy is. I know in the past against KC, sometimes they've played to give up some of the run, like try and take the ball out of Mahomes' hands, like force them to be perfect. And KC generally has been perfect in the scenarios. It hasn't exactly worked out for Buffalo, but that has been a strategy of them in the past, which is like, the exact opposite of what they did against Baltimore. Not entirely sure what they're going to do this week. The KC passing game hasn't been as strong this year, but still, end of the day at the playoffs, I think you'd rather have KC trying to establish some 4-yard Kareem Hunt carries than Mahomes dropping back.
Yeah, so if we can end up with try to figure out the running back that's on the field for the most passing downs, which is probably just the running back who's on the field the most anyway. If we take end of game 2-minute drill out of it, are we leaning? It probably is Kareem Hunt.
I'd lean Hunt. If I had to make a guess there, I would say Hunt.
Okay. Now let's say it's you and you're, for whatever reason, you're in this very difficult position of being hired as the offensive coordinator and play caller of the Kansas City Chiefs, playing your Buffalo Bills in this AFC title game. You get the ball first. Buffalo wins the toss. They defer. They're kicking to you. What is the game plan coming out? What's the easiest way you think to beat this Bills defense?
Man, I think if you're just really patient and take all the short throws, like Buffalo's generally designed to not give up the really big play. And that's what Mahomes has done against them in the past. So I don't know if it's anything different than we've seen from KC against Buffalo previously, which is just really high completion rate, picking them apart, 5 to 10 yards at a time. Probably mix in a bunch of like annoying, worthy spam stuff, whether it's screens, reverses, and whatnot. That's I don't know if that's micro enough for what you're looking for, but that's probably the way I do it.
No, it is like that's what I'm thinking that they're going to do, because I don't even know if they have the ability to go over the top, because the Bills got caught against Denver, they got caught against Baltimore. Like, if it was going to be anyone, you'd think it would be Hollywood Brown, being that he's a speedster, but it still feels like the one guy that they send on deep routes. Like, is it going to be Brown? Is it going to be Worthy? It's like, let's put Justin Watson on the field. No one will even cover him. Let him run a 9 down the field and see if he's open.
Yeah, I think it'll be. I mean, Brown almost had that long completion against Houston, so I imagine that's the guy they're most likely try to take shots with. They do still try to do it with Worthy, even though they mixed in a bunch of short stuff as well. But man, I'm like, as a Bills fan, I'm just fearful of like 8-yard Travis Kelce catch after 8-yard Travis Kelce catch. I'm so glad though. Last year, Buffalo was like just decimated in terms of defensive injuries when the two teams met in the playoffs. And Kelce absolutely tore them up. They didn't have Matt Milano. They didn't have Bernard, their other backer. So Bills are better positioned to hopefully, contain Kelce this week. But that'd be my fear. Is it just like 8-yard Kelce catch after 8-yard Kelce catch?
Let's see here. So if we know that that's coming, do you think Milano will end up spying Mahomes?
Yeah, I think he's going to spy Mahomes for, at least some critical plays here and there.
Because that's basically what we saw against Baltimore. And what that led to was this big gap between like 5 and 15 yards over the middle of the field. And that's where Baltimore did all of its damage. Even when they were coming back in that game, like, the Mark Andrews catch that turned into a fumble, like there was no one around him until they punched the ball out. But that was open all game long. I feel like I read it the same way you do. That's going to be there. So I was actually looking at Noah Gray, like 1.5 catches, 14.5 yards. That seems pretty low for something he could pick up. He could pick up the yardage on one play. And if that is going to be open the entire game, if Milano does have to stay with Mahomes, if Mahomes can show that he's willing to break it outside and actually take off, it stunts the entire Bills defense.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I like that call. One thing they did against Lamar that was a little frustrating. I understood it seemed like they were really trying to keep their lanes pass rushing where they didn't want him to get outside and scramble, but all it did was just buy him more time and he was able to run when he wanted to anyways. I think against Mahomes, they're going to have more of a, traditional pass rush, maybe try and bring a little bit more pressure rather than the real patient stay in your lanes approach they took against Lamar at times.
Do you think that's a better strategy, knowing that Mahomes doesn't have the speed of Lamar, and if he makes one guy miss, he's not just going to be gone for 60 yards down the field, and that Kansas City has had problems completing these downfield passes this year?
Yeah, you definitely want to bring a little bit more pressure. And I mean, you're hoping the biggest way to stop Mahomes is if you're able to get pressure with 4. That's one of my main concerns with the Bills defense this week will be, I think they're going to attempt to get more pressure with 4 than they did against Lamar, where I said, again, they were like holding their lanes a lot. But whether they can actually do that, Rousseau, Von Miller, how they play is really going to have a big impact, I think, on the outcome. But you're always fearful of the Mahomes scramble still. But like you said, it's definitely still not even close to the same tier as Lamar. And if you have Milano spine, you feel better about that one-on-one. Milano did it against Bo Nix a little bit too in the matchup against Denver.
And how successful was that against Bo Nix in those one-on-one matchups? Was he able to make Milano miss?
He had one really strong play that sticks out where Nix started to run to the corner and Milano chased him down and didn't let him get the corner. I don't know, all the times they used it, but that play sticks out where Milano does have pretty good speed for a linebacker.
Jared, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, you said that they were going to like nickel and dime him to death. I guess it might come down to the red zone. And Andy Reid is obviously a very creative play caller in the red zone. Do you trust them to hold them to field goals and not touchdowns?
Do I trust them? I mean, not really, but I hope it. I don't have a great answer for you. I feel like I don't have enough football guy knowledge to know exactly how the red zone matchup's going to be there. You're just always they have so many ways they can beat you in the red zone. They do that annoying stuff to Worthy. Kelce's such a force down there, and Mahomes in the playoffs is definitely going to take off and try and score if he can. It's scary when they get down in the red zone for sure, and they've been able to do some of this short yardage running with Hunt this year that's not explosive, but seems to get the job done in the short yardage situations. So I'm definitely a bit scared.
I would wager like the number one thing, like if I'm a Bills fan and I see that the Chiefs are on the 6-yard line, I have my eyes closed, I have my fingers crossed that Andy Reid is going to dial up the stupidest play possible and the Bills turn it over.
I was gonna say the same thing. I think like our best hope is that like Reid tries to get too crazy, and then you have some sort of negative play, and then I mean Houston really contained them pretty well, but we don't have like a Will Anderson though, who was like huge in that game, and that's that's the concern.
Oh, of course. But like you can't underestimate Andy Reid's like flashiness and like galaxy brain in the red zone. Like they'll do the like 'cause I think Rob Pizzola made this point on the Best Bet show. Like Worthy higher than 2.5 rushing yards is a pretty good look. He got stuffed in the backfield last week. Again, this is a much weaker defense than, especially up front, than Houston's. Like you just mentioned, there's no Will Anderson on the Bills. So Worthy should be able to hit that. That's one of the ones I like on Underdog. We'll fill out one right towards the end of your time being on here to see if we can figure something out just for this game in particular and try to play like a same game underdog play and try to win 10 times our money. That's always fun. You can win like a lot times your money if you use code Mayo right now at Underdog. $1,000 deposit bonus, a free pick to add on to double your odds. Sounds pretty good to me. So if you haven't done that, help out the show and use code Mayo at Underdog. But I just, instead of letting, if they do like a jet sweep or whatever, they do a reverse with Xavier Worthy that in this time around in the AFC Championship game, he's probably going to like try to throw it or something.
We were looking at red zone carries for Kansas City in the games that both Hunt and Pacheco played together. And it's Hunt 9, Pacheco 5, Xavier Worthy 4. So he's in the mix there.
You think Juju can get a catch? Because that's another one. Like if we can pick off some of these, I think Juju's prop is like 4.5 receiving yards.
I know, and he did not get like squeezed the way people thought. Like, oh, in the playoffs, they're just not going to play Juju. He had a 29% route share, which it's not a high route share, but it's more than I think people think. I have no confidence though in that one way or the other.
No,
he's probably like 50-50 to get a catch.
Well, I think that when you construct these props, I think you need to go in with a mindset of how is this game going to go? That's how I'm going to construct when I talk to Sia a little bit later on. Like, I think that Philly is going to win this game. I don't know if they cover the 6. That's just where I'm leaning right now. Maybe Jalen Hurts is so banged up that they can't win. But in the Bills game, I would expect the Bills to score a lot of points here. And not necessarily reminiscent of the first game, but I do think that the Bills jump out to a lead. If they don't, it's not great news for the Bills. But if they can score like 17 in the first half, 20 in the first half, and establish that, then you force Kansas City to pass. And then all of these guys become live for these super low props. So if you go with the mindset that the Bills are going to hold a lead, whether they hold it the entire game, this I do not know. But if you think that they can get up early, I think that Kansas City will go away from running the ball as much as they want to do.
Yeah, they're going to throw. I feel much more confident they're going to throw, honestly, almost regardless. Once you get in the playoffs with Mahomes, their pass rate expectation is pretty high. So I think you have outs there playing, the KC pass rate, where even if they're playing from ahead, they might throw more, as long as they're not giving into, Buffalo wanting them to run. And that's sort of the chess match that we're going to see. One way to play this game, too, I mentioned the volatility on the Bills pass rate. I think a lot of the markets and a lot of the public are leaning into what we've seen the first 2 games from Buffalo, which is a run heavier approach. That's what I think they're going to do. But if we're wrong and they just come out and they're really pass heavy, then you've got a lot of correlation between the different pass catchers, and you're getting their lines probably as low as you're going to get them because of what's happened the past 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, for example, Amari Cooper, 16.5 receiving yards, 1.5 catches. Shakir's at 4.5 catches, 56.5 receiving yards. I actually like Keon Coleman in this game for one big catch somewhere down the line, because he does seem to be the one when everything breaks down and Josh starts scrambling around, that he's the one who finds himself open down the field.
Yeah, I like the Amari props too on feel a bit, especially if you're playing this angle that the Bills are going to be a little bit more aggressive throwing. As I said earlier in the show, like on the boundary, one-on-one, like he's their primary threat there. There's not, I like Keon in the broken play scenario, but he's not someone that's earning a lot of separation. Amari's their best shot there.
He's not earning a lot of separation, but it's more so I find when they actually are across the 50 and Allen just wants to take a shot to the end zone. Those shots are almost primarily to Coleman, like because he doesn't get the separation, but he can win one-on-one in a jump ball situation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So
We've seen that. We saw it against the Lions. He had that huge broken play. We saw it against the Jets. We've seen it a few times this year where he can, utilize his size a bit more.
yeah, well, the other one is going to be, I mean, Curtis Samuel, 1.5 catches. He just seems to be more involved now.
Yeah, they kind of gave him that trial. He was the one guy who played week 18 coming back from injury. They really wanted to get him the mix. They just have I mean, the thing is, like, all these lines seem really low. So you can definitely talk yourself into them. I'd be careful pairing Amari, Keon, and Samuel together because those are the guys that are kind of fighting for those peripheral targets. So I wouldn't want to, as much as I want to play Buffalo to pass heavy, and that's going to help everybody, I'd be a little weary of grouping those three guys together too much.
That's fair. I was looking for the main one from the Bill side, and although it is,
I like Amari as the main one. That'd be my main one. I'll go with Amari. I'm feeling Amari this week.
So you're feeling Amari. Are you feeling Amari yardage or 1.5 receptions?
I prefer the yardage there.
Just take the one, like it all happens at once.
What
about
so much
this?
Volatility. I think he's going to get a downfield look this week. I'd take the yardage where there's a good chance you get the yardage if you're getting the 2 catches anyways. I mean, I know obviously they know what they're doing when they're making the lines and they're factored in, but but yeah, I like the yardage better there.
What about just it's 16.5 yardage? What about 12.5 longest reception?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at our stuff, what we liked the most there, which would be, I guess it depends what the juice is. I'm assuming on the underdog stuff, it's kind of the same between the yardage and the receptions.
The receptions is actually like you get an extra for getting the over on the receptions of 1.5. It's 1.12, I think, and everything else is like either or the other side.
So the way we have it, we don't have the underdog lines pulled in directly, but when you get at like plus 100-ish on the receptions, we have that as the best angle to take.
And it would be like
from a pure,
and it's like plus 112 right now.
Oh yeah, I think that's good. I think that's honestly like a good straight bet. You've got that plus 112. So I like the Amari. Yeah, I'll switch to catches knowing that it's plus 112.
Yeah, it's actually plus 105 now. It actually adjusted live as we were talking. So people are listening to this and they're betting Amari Cooper. Ha ha! Joke's on you. I'm paid by Underdog. It's definitely going lower now. But Curtis Samuel, I am going to take the 1.5 receptions over because I don't think that Samuel's in competition with Cooper and Coleman and Shakir for these receptions. I feel like he's more in competition with Cook and Ty Johnson and Ray Davis or even like a Kincaid screen. Like they did use him down the field in the Broncos game and he caught the touchdown. But like when you see the routes that he's running, they're like 2 yards, like within above or beyond the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm assuming you're getting negative juice on that one.
You are. So that it kind of equals, it's a little bit more, but it almost equals itself out with Cooper and Samuel. So I got Cooper, Samuel, and then Gray over 1.5 receptions worthy. Who doesn't, like, am I just stupid not to be like, hey, Kelsey over whatever?
What I saw the tweet going around of since the last few years he's gone over every single game in the playoffs, but I do think it might have slightly over adjusted this week. I think his line's like 20 yards higher than it was last week, whereas last week people didn't build in the playoff bump enough, and now people are like, oh yeah, now we're 100% in on the playoff bump. So I wouldn't, I'd be too scared to take the under there, but I don't really like the over either. I'd abstain on Kelsey.
Yeah, it's 69.5 right now. What's like you're local to Buffalo. What's the sentiment like around town? Because you always feel like with the Bills in these situations, at least in the Josh Allen era, it's all like, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. And then the game kicks off and everyone's like, ooh, and it's tight for 60 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's expecting the same thing. Everyone's feeling really good off the win, and Baltimore kind of like, okay, we got past Baltimore. This is our year. This is the time. I feel like the vibe is, surprisingly confident, which is scary. But that's this sense that I'm getting from at least most of the Bills fans that I interact with.
How I over-established the run when you and Dink are working on the projections. How much do you have to basically no ball projections in the playoffs, knowing that teams are going to adjust their offensive styles?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. And that's where like Silva and Levitan come in more than me and Dink. I try to sound like I know ball, but those are the true ball knowers at ETR. I just try to like think of the range of outcomes and like tether it to like some sort of baseline that makes sense. So it's like, okay, we're gonna bump Kelsey for the playoffs, but we have to have some sort of reasonable tether to what's actually happened out there. And it's helpful to go through the projections process. I mentioned all the narratives with KC to know that like we can't bump 4 of their guys on different narratives because the math just does not work out. We can only allocate 100% of the targets. We can't send 120% of the targets somewhere. So uh, there's a good balance between the I hate to even say math because I think people that makes it sound more objective than it is. It's still super subjective as far as what target share we're going to give a player. But I guess the constraints of like the structure of doing projections is really helpful to marry with the potential ball knowing knowledge.
Yeah, if in the chat right now, you can jump in the chat on YouTube. You can jump on the chat on X as well. If you're on X, please share this show around. I'm looking at the YouTube chat right now. Justin says he's someone who's local to Buffalo, and they're already bracing for the refs to win the game for Kansas City. John immediately with an independent comment directly after. He's like, I am also in Buffalo. Vibe is hopeful, but very nervous. A lot of ref excuses already.
Yeah, especially after last week. And then, of course, the Bills against Lamar had like what should have been flagged as a late hit and didn't get called for it. So, we're just hoping to get equal treatment here between Josh Allen and Mahomes for this game.
Well, I thought it was funny because I was watching the game with a few friends and Lamar gets tackled out of bounds and there's no flag on the play. And they're like, if that was Mahomes, he would have got a flag. It's like, he should have got the flag. Like any quarterback would have gotten the flag. I don't know how he didn't get the flag.
That was very clearly a late hit. That first one against Will Anderson and Mahomes though was so bad. But if I rant though, I do kind of like I'm torn because I'm like frustrated when I see the Chiefs get these calls like that. But at the same time, when you're as good as the Chiefs and you're in as many big games as the Chiefs that are close, but you're generally like slightly the better team, there's going to be a lot of 50-50 calls that seem like they go the Chiefs' way. And I know people have looked at some like raw penalty stuff with like arbitrary cutoffs, but I don't think that's like the best way to look at it. So no, the NFL is not rigged for the Chiefs for people out there.
No, that's I'm on the internet. That's not what I heard. People just love complaining. Like there's no way there's no way a team could win by being good. It needs to be assisted by someone. This is where we're at now in 2025. This is how it works. No one can just win.
It was, I mean, similar for the Patriots. Granted, some legitimate allegations there, but the Patriots. I mean, whenever there's a team that's good for that long, they're going to win some close games where they got a little bit lucky or a fortunate call, either because just from probability of always being in that game, but also if they do end up the eventual winner, there's some like hindsight, like, oh, they benefited from this call. Like you could probably paint that narrative with any team that wins like any game, like even the Bills Ravens games. There were a couple calls against the Bills and a couple calls definitely like favorable for the Bills that if you treated that game as a Chiefs game and you looked back on it, you could have said like, oh, that Keon Coleman, pass interference was, the favorable call for the Chiefs, but because it's the Bills and they haven't won as much as the Chiefs, you don't get as much of that hindsight narrative.
No, and it's like a lot of people forget that they watch Monday Night Football every week, and everyone just tweets out the same like yellow flags on the field everywhere. It's like people forget that this doesn't just happen like the random Jags Titans 2:00 game, 1:00 game that no one is watching. Like the calls are equally as bad in these games. Like the reffing just sucks.
Yeah, that the simplest solution, what's that Occam's razor? The simplest answer is generally the correct answer. And I saw another one too, where they're like, under this certain ref, the Chiefs are 7-0 this, and it's like they went 15-2. You could there's a lot of splits you could find where they go 7-0 or 8-0.
Were they 15-2 or 16-1?
Or what they 16-1? I guess in my
head, they were 15.
Oh, they lost the game against Denver
in the last week.
Trying.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I got some breaking news for you. You ready?
Oh, I hope it's not bad news.
It's not. Well, it depends on how you feel about the Las Vegas Raiders, who just hired Pete Carroll to be their head coach.
Wow, kind of surprised by that. Didn't see that coming.
I like it for them. Like I've been kind of pushing the Pete Carroll narrative because I still think that he's good for a team that's not going anywhere, who needs to reestablish a culture. And listen, how old is Pete Carroll? Pete Carroll is 73 years old. He's not going to be there for the next 10 years coaching your team. If your team is going nowhere, you have a high draft pick, you have like a good player or two, reestablishing a culture now, getting pieces in place for whoever like the next hot shot head coach coming in, and everything is there for him. I just think Pete Carroll's, listen, he's 73 and maybe he's like aged 20 years since I last saw him in Seattle. But I think eventually that shtick wears out, and obviously it did. And the team that he brought to prominence in Seattle fizzled out when they all got older. But I do think that coming in, coaching up young guys is what Pete Carroll is designed to do. And then you can show him the door. He'll probably walk to the door.
No, I think there's definitely logic to that. Like, I like Pete Carroll. I'm a pretty big fan. I used to not be, but then, I've gotten more into the culture stuff as we've seen, even with the Bills, and you just see some of these organizations like the Jets, for example, who hire these guys, time after time. And it's such a disaster that you start to respect these guys that can create environments where players are developing and like really trying to get better. And you hope that the coaches evolve on the strategy standpoint of things, and that's very important. But the culture grounds things. And to your point, he's probably going to pass it off to somebody else at a certain point in time anyways.
Yeah, Sammy says it really doesn't make sense for the Raiders, in his opinion. Why do they want to go 7-9 every year? Like, I don't think that's the point behind this. Like, you're now dealing with the Chiefs in your division, the Broncos on the up and up with a rookie quarterback now going into year 2, and they can build more pieces around them. And then you have the Chargers, who are going to be good and beat all the crappy teams. Maybe they improve year 2 under Harbaugh, and Herbert doesn't just take a big dump down his leg in the playoffs again, and he plays up to that ability. So you're going to be the worst team in this division regardless. If somehow they got to 7 wins, it's probably not ideal for where they want to project. That probably means you're on the right path at this point, I would think.
Yeah. The only counter, I guess, would be if this guy isn't going to be the long-term coach because of his age, wouldn't you rather take some shots now on finding the next good head coach? And then if it doesn't work out, you can move on, as opposed to, in a few years from now, all your eggs are going to be in that basket. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
I see. I mean, if I was the owner of a franchise, I have started to come to the conclusion that, listen, coaches can be good, coaches can be bad, but they don't really matter. Having a good quarterback matters.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback's the most critical piece, and you want a coach that's not going to mess it up. But yeah, I do think
having a bad coach is so much worse for your franchise than what a good coach can bring to you, I think, at least.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Having a bad coach is more catastrophic than having a normal. I mean, there's probably a few exceptions on the good side, but they're few and far between.
Yeah, like there are certain guys that will elevate everyone around them due to play call. I mean, that's what we think that we're seeing with Ben Johnson in Detroit, and if he can carry that over to Chicago. But if his system doesn't work outdoors with Caleb Williams, like, well, maybe just that team's not good.
Yeah.
And like, it'll be the same thing with Liam Cohen now going to Jacksonville. Like, is it going to work with Trevor Lawrence and a bad offensive line than it did with Baker Mayfield and a good offensive line? And, players who are strategically put in place to catch screen passes and working on that kind of thing. If you don't have the right personnel, it's not going to work. And I think that's the Pete Carroll thing right now. Like, this is pure rebuild for the Raiders. And he's sort of a bridge coach to get the pieces in place for someone else to come in and do the dirty work. He has to basically coach up these young guys, find out. It's more of like I feel like if you're hiring Pete Carroll, it's a 2-year program to evaluate the talent you have, find the pieces, bring in some new young guys, coach them up for when you build out your offensive line, build out your defensive line. Are you in a position to hire the right coordinator or new head coach when you find the quarterback that actually goes with this team? That's the only way you can compete in both the AFC and that division.
Yeah. Establish the culture. And to your point with the coordinator, it's not like Pete's going to be trying to call plays or anything here. So, yeah, you get the right coordinator, you get the right quarterback, and as head coach, you're just setting the tone and establishing the culture. And I think that makes sense. I'm mostly just glad you didn't give me some breaking news that like some Buffalo Bill wasn't playing.
No, Mahomes is out for everything. He's out for life. Well, yeah. Okay, would you rather lose to Mahomes or lose to Carson Wentz?
We're not losing to Carson Wentz, Pat.
Hey, he might throw a ball backwards with his left hand. You don't know what he's going to do. But do you like Liam Cohen to Jacksonville? Because I didn't realize there was a whole saga. I forgot that he became the highest paid coordinator of all time to stay with Tampa. And he just leaves to go to Jacksonville.
I don't have much of an opinion. I feel like I don't know Liam Cohen that well. So yeah, I mean, it's
McVay tree.
crazy. My only opinion on the situation is that Jacksonville doesn't seem like a very well run organization, given that they didn't fire the GM and then they couldn't get the top coaching candidates, and then they had to like scurry and fire the GM so that they could get Cohen, and it didn't seem like a great process overall. Maybe it'll work out for them. They eventually got the right guy, and they were at least willing to move on from Balk before it got too detrimental. But it's kind of shocking they didn't just move on from the GM in the first place.
Yeah, it just sounded like they wanted to stick by their guy, and they're like, oh, this is not the right guy to stick by. It's like when someone on your workforce tweets out something racist on Twitter, and you're like, no, we're standing by our guy. It was just a mistake, and then they like double down on. You're like, oh fuck, why didn't we just fire this guy the moment it came out?
And but I saw an interview a week or two ago with the Jaguars owner and the GM, and the owner's basically with the GM on the interview was like, if it really came down to it and we had to fire the GM, we would. Like, he basically said this on an interview with the GM on there, and then it actually happened. So that's pretty funny.
John in the chat says it makes sense to try to change the culture first and improve the vibes and get your young hotshot head coach when it looks like a better situation in the building. I'm under that impression too, but sometimes you like, especially with a franchise like Vegas, which is basically known for its dysfunction, simply having an adult in the room, even if it's like a 73-year-old man who might act like he's 35 and like rah, just having that presence. Football is so much different than every other sport when it comes to coaching. Like, I would almost think of Carroll right now in the same vein as Tomlin, where what is Tomlin really doing besides bringing vibes to the team and coaching people up and getting them to not act like knuckleheads most of the time?
Yeah, I think we've seen too with certain organizations, if you get the right front office with that coach culture, that they can pass down some of the strategy side of things and get the coach to buy in, where it doesn't have to like originate from the coach himself. And especially some of this stuff that's more table stakes with fourth down decision making and whatnot is just becoming so much more widespread and prevalent that there's, unless you just really run into a coach that's super stubborn, which I don't think Pete Carroll is, you don't need, I guess what I'm trying to say is that's more the kind of default decision making now, and it's easier for an average coach to buy into that than it used to be. So there's less of a concern that this coach is going to be super conservative on those strategy elements.
Yeah, and maybe that will end up being the case. Maybe if you go super conservative strategy elements, at least for year one under Pete Carroll, you probably only win 3 games anyway, and you get another good pick.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's built-in tanking for the Raiders. Who knows? Like, because Dion was like rumored to go there for a bit if they could get Shadur to go there as well. And I don't think that was ever really going to happen. But if you could have it on both sides, like Dion could be a good head coach. I have no idea, and he is kind of a pump you up and get you to play type guy too. But at least we know with Carroll that he's done it before.
Yeah, I mean, his players love him. They always played really hard. And to your point, I do think there's an element where after a certain amount of time with an organization, it's probably just best for like both pieces to move on. I mean, no matter how good of a coach you are, how good of a fit you are, there's probably a period of time where it's just been long enough. I think Bill Walsh has talked about this a decent bit, who was with San Francisco for so long and had a ton of success there, that, at a certain point, you just need to change things up a little bit for both the coach and the organization itself.
It's going to happen to Tomlin. Like, Tomlin's going to be gone from Pittsburgh soon. They can't just lose in the first round of the playoffs every year with media. I mean, maybe it's their GM who needs to be fired because they seem to have mediocre talent.
That's the thing with Tomlin is I feel like it's unfair, a lot of the criticism he gets for these early round playoff exits, when really he should just be getting credit for getting the team there in the first place.
So I have the underdog play right now. Here's what it is. Noah Gray, higher than 1.5 receptions. Xavier Worthy, higher, 2.5 rushing yards. Amari Cooper, higher, 1.5 receptions. Curtis Samuel, higher, 1.5 receptions. $100 pays $900.
All the low volume players. We're the best part about this sweat is we're in it basically the whole game.
We are. And you know what? You could probably play the opposite and just play the lowers on all 4 of those guys, and you'll probably have the same sweat in the fourth quarter.
You'll be live. We're maximizing sweat equity with our parlays.
Yeah, so I just dumped that link into the YouTube chat if anyone is looking for it. But before I let you go, Mr. Mike, give me a prediction on the game score.
I'm gonna go Buffalo 31, KC 23. Homerism.
So basically what happened in like week 11 or whatever it was.
Yeah, we're just gonna get a redux. I'd be fine with that. I'll take it.
All right. And for the other game, which I'm going to be talking about in a second with Sia, who do you like in that game and what's the score?
We go Philly 24-14.
Philly 9-6. Wait, forward to the DraftKings angle, like, is there a game, like, are you targeting the Bills-Kansas City game? I know you mentioned the receivers from that game versus the other one, but it does feel like on this slate, it's either Allen or Daniels as your quarterback for maximum upside.
I think there's a lot with Mahomes running a little bit more in the playoffs and him being cheaper. I think he's actually pretty in play. He's also a little easier to correlate, but I do think I'll be heavier KC Buffalo because there's just routes that the Philly Washington game tanks, and there's not a lot of fantasy points, and it's only a 2-game slate, so you could get a lot of wacky combos in KC Buffalo that hit if you get like when Philly. We were looking at their play calling in scripts, like if you just divvied them up between trailing, neutral, and leading, and when they lead, their pass rate's like 30% or like negative 13% PROE. So if you can get them up early and pounding Saquon, it could be really ugly game for fantasy points all around.
Ken, but do you think that there would be like, let's say I'm playing one lineup this week and I want to play like the 150. Like I haven't really looked at any DraftKings stuff for NFL because I'm kind of out this time of year. I did just win 20 grand on golf DraftKings. That was fun.
Ooh.
Sometimes Pat has a decent strategy that he follows. I followed the same strategy on Thursday. Did not work out so well. It only takes one though. I'll trade off winning 22K one day and then losing 1,000 the next day. That's okay. It's a good trade-off. But I was just thinking stacking up the Eagles passing game and be like, oh, everyone's overblown this, and AJ Brown, Devontae, and Hurts go off. I feel like that's a strategy to either come first in a GPP or last.
Definitely high risk, high reward. I do think AJ Brown is under-owned on the slate, just because of the last 2 games, and people are so focused on the floor, they're worried about Hurts' knee and whatnot, that there's not that many good receivers on this slate. So I do like AJ Brown in particular a lot, but more of my teams are going to be slanted towards KC Buffalo, but maybe with AJ Brown in the mix there. I think there's a lot of recency bias, especially when you get into these playoff slates where people feel like the playoff games carry a lot more weight, and that's partially true, but it might be overdone a bit by the field.
All right, Mike Leone at 2 hats, but just one Mike. No longer the poor man's Pat Mayo, because you're in really good shape now.
Oh, thank you. I'll always be the poor man's Pat Mayo, though.
Yeah. If you ever get on to Kay Adams' show, you have to bring that up. You realize that, right?
In the 0.00001% outcome that I'm on the Kay Adams show, I will bring it up.
Hey, Levitan goes on with like Schefter.
That's true. That's true. Who would have thought? What a world.
I know. Well, can you tell people that story? Because I find it so hilarious.
So we were at I think it was a FanDuel Fantasy Baseball Championship, and Kay Adams was there as like the MC, like FanDuel hired her. And I don't remember how it came up that we were talking about you, Pat, but Kay Adams looks at me, she goes, "You're like the poor man's Pat Mayo." So that's my moniker now. And then she went and interviewed Ricky Henderson, and I was like, oh, now she's up there with Ricky.
Well, you go from the poor man's Pat Mayo to Ricky Henderson, who R.I.P. Ricky Henderson talking in the third person the entire. If you just talked into the third person, you would have been the rich man's Pat Mayo.
I know.
And as I've pointed out, you actually are the rich man's Pat Mayo. I'm actually the poor man's Pat Mayo.
Not for a second. You're not fooling me.
Yeah, all right. Establish the run. Everyone knows all about it. You can check out Mike's work there. And at 2 hats, 1 Mike. Go Buffalo just for you in this game, Mike. I'm rooting for you. Sia Nejad is coming up right after this. Welcome to the TGL presented by SoFi, golf's newest league. It's sharp. It's electric. How is it sharp? How is it electric? Good questions. Try this on for size. 2 hours of hammer dropping, overtime, forcing playoffs on the line golf, with 24 of the best players from the PGA Tour. This Monday, Jupiter Links Golf Club versus Boston Common Golf. Tiger Woods, Kevin Kisner, and Tom Kim taking on Rory McIlroy, Keegan Bradley, and Adam Scott. This isn't your average Sunday pickup game because you'll want to bet against the Jupiter Lynx. Tune in each week for TGL only on ESPN. Keep up. It's golf. Coming back with Sia Nejad in the Washington area. You're at the studio right now, aren't you?
I'm not, but I'm like 5 to 10 miles. I'm going to the studio pretty much after this show. So I'll be at Capital One Arena doing the By the Book show that you're on all the time.
I do come on that show. Can you tell everyone where they can watch it if they're in the DC area and what time it's on?
Yeah, Monumental Sports Network. It's the same network that houses the Capitals games and the Wizards games and all that kind of stuff. 5:30 Monday through Friday. It's me and Meg McDonald. It's a sports betting show, 30 minutes. It's mostly football, but we're starting to touch college basketball as well. 5:30 every day.
And everything needs to be localized to Washington by and large. Like you always have to talk about the Commanders. Did you go out of your way to not talk about the Wizards?
It's interesting because it's I guess fortunate in some cases. We can't, because it's a betting show, we can't really talk about the Capitals or the Wizards because there's just a bit of, conflict there when it comes to stuff like that. So we can talk about the Commanders all we want because Monumental doesn't own the Commanders, obviously, or like the Nationals, for example. But we kind of stay away, other than just saying, hey, we hope they get a win. We stay away from the Wizards and the Caps.
So I asked Leone what the vibe check in Buffalo was. What's the vibe check in DC right now?
Well, first of all, I agree. I think Buffalo's going to win. But so it's a big house money vibe. Like, hey, we're kind of playing with house money. This, if we lose, it's fine. If we win, it's even better. But I do think there's just like an upswell of like true legitimate hope, or not hope, but optimism that we can beat this division rival. Like, and I don't think that's really out of the question in anybody's eyes. But I think the Washington fans are starting to think like, hey, this is a really good situation. I honestly, personally, rather play the Eagles than the Rams because I just thought Sean McVay and Matt Stafford could scheme their way to just all kinds of offense. We got Jalen Hurts kind of injured here. So, yeah, I think people expect them to maybe lose around here, but there's optimism that they can win.
Do you think they're going to win? Or do you think they'll cover the 6? Let's start there.
Yeah, I do think they're going to cover it. So there's so many different scenarios here. And obviously one of them is Washington gets completely blown out. But I do think if we're doing the game strip, like out of 10 times, how many are a blowout by the Eagles? I think 1 or 2 certainly are, but I think most of them are a competitive game. A couple of them are Washington winning. 6 points is a lot, especially when you're talking about a division rival. Like these teams really know each other. They know where the weaknesses are. They know where the strengths are. And as good as Saquon Barkley is, we have a Jalen Hurts that hasn't looked like a quarterback at all lately, frankly. And it could be a result of his injury, but I think there are scenarios where Washington can move the ball on Philadelphia because I think the defense is very good, but perhaps a little overrated. We saw Matt Stafford pass all over him last week. We saw Jaden Daniels throw for 5 touchdowns against them when they played last. So there's just a lot of scenarios where Jaden Daniels can keep up with the Saquon Barkley-led Philadelphia Eagles. Does the, quote, luck run out for Washington? I don't think it's luck. A lot of people call it that on the 4th down conversions and stuff like that. But this is a really well-run offense. So I think they can keep up. I think Saquon Barkley could have 170 total yards, and Washington could win this game.
I would agree because, I mean, one of the biggest things that I was thinking about in this game, like one of my favorite like underdog plays this week is Jalen Hurts lower 181 passing yards because I feel like I also have the out that he's actually hurt and might leave the game at some point. That you just as it turns out, if guys get injured, they're under hits if you bet on their under. I know that a lot of people on the internet don't realize that, but that's an actual thing. Like you can cash those ones. You don't have to complain to the sports book that your guy got hurt.
Right.
You can just cash your bet and be on your way. So this is the
you don't refund the sports book in that case.
Yeah.
You don't say, hey, sports book, I'm going to give you your money back. That's not fair to you guys.
But you can always get got in these situations when you're playing around with injuries that we don't know the severity of. But I do think that the Eagles win. And I think the Eagles probably win pretty comfortably. And it has relatively nothing to do with their offense. Like, I think Barkley's going to go off because, like you said, he can go off for a ton and Washington can still win. It's the first game. And maybe the offense has changed so much. and they've understood what they need to do against the Eagles now. But I just worry that like McLaurin is not going to be open in this game. And when he's not open and you're relying on Zacchaeus screens and Zach Ertz running in like molasses 6 yards down the field, it's not a really great way to advance the ball unless Jaden Daniels is like going off running.
What I will say is that the Jaden Daniels going off running thing is certainly in play, but more importantly, we've seen Washington win games without McLaurin going off from a volume perspective. We and it's just like, who is it going to be? Is it going to be Bates? Is it going to be Ertz? Like, there's so many random names: De'Ami Brown, Zacchaeus, Jamison Crowder. By the way, his yardage prop is 10.5. I kind of like the over for Jamison Crowder because in big spots, I could see him on the field versus an Olamide Zacchaeus. So I do think even without McLaurin, and you're right, the defensive backs are really good. But again, Washington did okay against them last time they played. I'm kind of hoping Quinyon Mitchell's a little hobbled, but it looks like he's probably going to be a full go. But I guess my retort to what you just said is I don't think it all comes down to McLaurin. I think you could have a game where McLaurin has 4 catches for, 58 yards, 0 touchdowns, and Washington could still put up 3 or 4 touchdowns. I think that's in play. I didn't even mention Eckler. I think he's a big part of the game plan as well.
So that seems to be one of the most popular props this week is the Eckler over receiving yards because it's been, coming through for everyone. Now it's getting pretty juiced up, though. We played one underdog entry earlier this week on the Best Bet show, and it had Daniels' longest rush, 14.5, over Eckler over 23.5 receiving yards. Those just feel like the auto clicks when you go to that game that does worry me a little bit.
Yeah, and that Eckler pick's been popular this is the 3rd week in a row. It's been a popular pick. I think last week it was 19.5. It might have gone up a little bit, but this is certainly the highest number. I just think he's going to be involved in the game plan. And it might be somewhat game script dependent. Like if you think Washington's trailing, Eckler gets a lot more looks. I do think running back receptions and yards can be kind of a little fluky sometimes with, the check down coming out of the backfield. Like, is he going to check it down or does he have his receivers, generally open, or Zach Ertz open over the middle? With that said, I still like the over on Eckler. He's too good. I honestly think he's so different than Brian Robinson because of his ability to make people miss just by kind of changing his body angle. It's not that he's still this super hyper fast athletic guy. I don't think he's really ever been that guy. He knows how to get to the second level without really taking a hard hit. So I think Austin Eckler over. I mean, I could see his rushing and receiving being in the potentially 50 to 60 range here, but I do like the over receiving yards. And again, 2-minute drill, trailing game script. You got to think Eckler's going to get at least a few looks.
So there has been an instance of 5 games this year where Jamison Crowder has recorded a reception. In 4 of those games, he has at least 2. The over on 1.5 receptions is plus 111.
So yeah, I looked at that yesterday. I actually prefer his over receiving yards, which I think is still Pat 10.5.
10.5.
Around, yeah. And that's at a minus number. It's not at the plus number, of course, minus 110, minus 115. But the point is, I think if Jamison Crowder catches one, it's probably for more than 11 yards or more. 2 receptions isn't asking a ton. So this really comes down to how they use Zacchaeus. Like over the last couple of games, we've noticed, especially last game. I mean, 2 games ago, he had 3 catches for only 19 yards. And last game, I don't think he recorded a catch, but he did have a groin injury that he apparently went out for, but came back in the second half. I feel like they're using Zacchaeus more for blocking than anything else. And so that does leave to me, even though Jamison's not on the field a lot, when he is on the field, he does get targeted sometimes, and he's such a solid veteran. We've seen Washington about a month ago win some games because of Jamison Crowder, because they were confident. Jaden was confident enough, Cliff Kingsbury confident enough to hit Jamison Crowder in big, high leverage spots in the end zone. So I think, I mean, listen, it's so speculative, right? But I do like his over 10.5 receiving yards, especially in a potentially negative game script. And I think his anytime touchdown, I think anytime touchdowns are very fluky, but if you were going to take a fluky one, I think Crowder might be a decent play.
Well, it makes a lot of sense with this resurgence of Crowder in this new look Washington offense, because he kind of came to prominent. He's not prominent. This guy has a max of 3 catches this year in a game. So let's, I guess, pump the brakes a little bit. But they're going to him in high leverage situations where they don't go to De'Ami Brown. They do not go to Zacchaeus. It's the role that Noah Brown kind of played for them, where they would just pepper, like if it was 3rd and 12, the 13-yard route would go to Noah Brown. It would hit him in the hands and he would drop it.
Well, I mean, listen, I think Noah Brown is historically like super underrated. And I think I say that mostly because he plays so hard. He has like that Isaiah Pacheco style about him where once he catches the ball, like he's going to do everything and anything to stay on his feet. With that said, I think it's a really good point you brought up because when Noah Brown went out, I think we noticed that Zacchaeus was really kind of taking over. Meanwhile, De'Ami Brown was, I think, dealing with injuries at that time. And so what we've seen is Zacchaeus and De'Ami Brown sort of switch roles a little bit from a target share standpoint and just everything standpoint. But I do think Jamison Crowder might be that guy that actually kind of replaces Zacchaeus in this case as the third receiving option. Of course, I'm not even including Ertz in that conversation. But yeah, I think the Noah Brown injury, they weren't sure what to do and who was going to be where. Now that they have everybody healthy, it seems to me that this game actually could be McLaurin and Ertz, of course, and then you've got De'Ami Brown and then Jamison Crowder and then Zacchaeus.
And it would make sense too, because as we've seen, like the outside corners, if you take away McLaurin and you take away Brown on the other side, then you're going to feed to Ertz because that's what happened a lot the last time. And that would actually play into the favor of Jamison Crowder as well, because he's going to line up in the slot and he's going to run his routes, between 7 and 12 yards down the field. He's basically there to get you first downs.
That's right. In big third down and fourth down looks, I mean, you could absolutely see Jamison Crowder. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Zach Ertz too, because his receptions is 3.5. It's juiced pretty high to the over. I don't know that I'm going to take that bet in terms of like paying the -140 or -150 on it, but you're right about the middle of the field. And Ertz, talk about a guy that's trusted near the red zone. Oh my gosh. When they get to the red zone, it feels like Ertz is either the first or second read almost every time. He is so trusted on those fourth downs that they convert. So many of those are looks to Zach Ertz, and so many of those are looks to Zach Ertz in the red zone, in the green zone. So I like, just changing gears here, I like Ertz's overs when it comes to receptions. I'll probably include it in like an SGP rather than just paying the juice there. But Ertz should have a big game. Another good anytime touchdown look.
Yeah, I mean, Crowder had 2 touchdowns the last time he played the Eagles, so that's something. The one thing of note here, and this is where I think I'm going to go with the Jamison Crowder play. It's 10.5 yards over under 1.5 receptions, which is juiced to the under. So you can get some plus money on the higher of that. But longest reception, 8.5 yards, I think is where I'm going to land with Jamison Crowder. So in games where he's caught passes this year, only against Tampa Bay back in September was it lower than 8.5 yards. Other than that, 12, 9, 9, 13 in the other 4 games.
That's a really smart play, in my opinion, especially since I just gave a dissertation on how I don't love the 1.5 and I kind of like the 1. So why take the 10.5 when you get the 8.5 with that one catch? I mean, again, that could fall under. It could be a 7-yard catch, but that's a great bet. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm stealing that.
Yeah, like so if it's going to be, like you said, if you like the 10.5 and we only think it's going to be 1 or 2 catches anyway, you might as well just go. Basically, you're dropping the yardage down to 8.5 and hopefully it hits.
Right. And for the record, he could still get 2 catches, and one of those likely is over the 8.5.
Of course. Yeah. And then you give up a bit of juice on the receptions, but that's not what we're playing for anyway. We're playing for the longest catch, and hopefully it comes in right. Like, I mean, the way that this works out is that we win this, but it's for 10 yards and everyone loses their 10.5.
Right. That's right.
Because the NFL is rigged.
Dude, I love that. I love the conspiracy theory, guys. You're not, Pat. I listened to your show enough, including, by the way, can I just say, I listened to when, I guess, what did this come out yesterday when you cussed in Jeff Feinberg? I thought what you said about resolutions and push notifications and deleting apps and how resolutions shouldn't be in December and all of that stuff. I thought that was like extremely good life advice. I don't think I'm breaking any news here, but I feel like people should go back that haven't listened to that for some reason. Go back and listen to that. I actually tagged it. It was in the hour and 20-minute mark when you started on that, when Cuss started on that discussion. You guys went for like 10 or 12 minutes. And I'm telling you, life advice, that is a really good 10 to 12 minutes. So my compliments to you. I don't know what we were talking about, but I had to say that.
I appreciate that. And I guess the big thing, just to expand on that a little bit more, is like, life is harder, and especially when you live in a cold weather climate. Like my climate is colder. I mean, it's probably not colder than your climate because I'm directly on the ocean. So we get regulated just a little bit, although it's not warm. Put it that way. Paul's going to Costa Rica next week. That sounds lovely, being in the warm weather. But being here, like, what are you doing in January? You can't go outside.
It's pretty much true. I mean, here normally it's like somewhat mild, but I can tell you this is the coldest because I was in, I was in Fort Lauderdale for 17 years. I come back to DC, and this is like the coldest winter I've ever experienced in my entire life. It has been somewhere between 5 degrees, and this is the DC area, mind you, 5 degrees and like 25 degrees for 2 weeks straight. And I think it probably lets up starting next week. It is, and when you get wind, which we have gotten, it's really hard to go outside. So those resolutions get put to bed pretty quick. It's just, it's not the greatest timing. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, and like, especially when he was talking about like, fast food is so enticing at this time. Like when you're not leaving your house, like I mean, I see you, and like obviously you stay in good shape, and the common theme of most people I know that are in good shape, they're either like at the gym 24 hours a day, and they're on some sort of like crazy no carb, high protein diet that like you really have to go out of your way to manufacture. The other people are like randomly in good shape, they're not bodybuilders, but they remain pretty low body fat, but they're just active all the time.
Mhm.
And when you're active all the time, you're just not as hungry all the time. When you get bored and sit in front of a TV all the time, that's when you're going to do your worst type of eating. When you know you're going to go home and you're not going to leave the house and you're just going to be sitting there, what do you fill the time with? Well, I'm going to go on my phone, I'm going to watch TV, and I'm going to eat like shit the entire night. And in January, that's what people do. Like, that's what I do. So I have to go out of my way to make sure that doesn't happen to me. Like, I have a treadmill at my house. Sometimes I just walk on the treadmill and watch TV just so I'm moving. Like, I'm not thinking about doing anything else. I'm just getting a little bit of movement. And sometimes all it takes is like 5 minutes of movement and you're not hungry anymore. Or just going to downing a huge glass of water. Then you're not hungry anymore. But that's not the first instinct that kicks in. You have to beat that first instinct. Now, it's the same way with quitting smoking, which I am terrible at. I go from quitting to smoking all the time. And when I'm in my good portion of not smoking, it's that initial reaction like, oh, I need to go have a cigarette right now. If I can just block that out for like 90 seconds, I don't smoke.
Yeah, I think a good example of what you just said on the front end. So again, I lived in Fort Lauderdale off Las Olas Boulevard for 17 years. Go, everybody right now in the cold weather, go book a ticket. If you have the funds to do it, go book a weekend ticket to Fort Lauderdale. It's going to be warm. Go stay somewhere near Las Olas Boulevard. It's just a great spot for bars and restaurants and art galleries and shopping and all of that stuff. You will see about 5% of the population is not in shape. And by the way, it's very vanity driven down there. So it's a kind of a different kind of set of people. But my point is, it's so warm all the time. People are outside all the time. People are active all the time. And just that activity gets people in shape, and it gets people kind of inspired to kind of stay in shape. So, I mean, I just think that's just coming from where I came from. It's just such a good example of that. Good weather breeds activity, breeds, generally good health and whatever, good form.
Yeah, well, I noticed it too. Like between moving from Toronto to where I'm at right now, Toronto, I live downtown. We didn't own a car until we had kids. We would walk everywhere, take the subway everywhere. Like I would walk to work for half an hour every day. Just, why not? It's nice out. I can walk. It'll probably take me shorter to walk than it will to drive with all the traffic. I move here. It is a driving heavy culture. Like you can't walk anywhere here. There's no good public transportation that anyone would want to take, and everything is so spread out. You drive everywhere, so you have to go out of your way to stay active. It's no different than I lived in Mattawa, New Jersey, and then I lived on the Lower East Side. And everyone in Manhattan, like, who the richest people are in Manhattan? By far the fattest people. Because they're just being driven around all the time. Everyone else is walking around. They're staying in shape all the time. You go to New Jersey, and I'm pretty sure people weigh 200 pounds more on average in New Jersey than they do in Manhattan.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, walking is a very important thing for 100%.
Yeah, so let's get back to this. From the Eagles side, yeah, walking important. I get that it sounds like, I know it sounds stupid to say it out loud, that obviously it is, but people don't move. Like, I remember us talking to Cust one time, and he was like, yeah, I got in 1,500 steps today. It's like, good Lord. That means you didn't
move.
Not a
lot. It's not a lot. But if you actually take stock of the activity people out there exhibit on a daily basis, you'll if you actually like look at it and think about it, you'll realize that there's not much activity going on in people's lives. And there are ways to improve that, whether it's cold outside or not.
Yeah, like you can even buy these like little treadmills that like they're kind of trash and garbage, but they work for what their purpose is. They're just like, just have it at, I think they're like $80 or something like that. They like go underneath your couch and come back out. They're not like an actual like jack it up to 10 and go for a jog. It's just for like walking and moving in place. It's actually quite helpful.
Yeah. All right, Eagles. Yeah. Sorry, we went off on a tangent there.
Eagles. Who is it from this game? Like, how are we playing this side of the game? Because I think that the common theory is, like I said, I took the lower on Jalen Hurts passing yards, the over on, I think I took Barkley over receiving yards because those anti-correlate really well. And it's only 12.5. If Hurts is banged up, he's going to check it down. I think that's the way they can get Barkley a bit more involved, especially if somehow they fall behind in the game. Then all of a sudden, I think you'll see Barkley used more in the passing game. They do have a tendency to take him out and use Gainwell in that situation, but game's on the line. You got to give the ball to your best player. But there could be a scenario here that I talked through with Leone a little bit that Hurts is fine. AJ Brown goes off, everything like that.
Well, especially from I know you talked to Mike a little bit about DFS. One of the narratives you can build on is maybe Washington's actually playing from a lead. They were last week against Detroit. Nobody thought that was going to happen. And if Jalen Hurts is healthy, then all of a sudden, maybe, of course, Barkley will have some, especially those receiving yards you talked about. But you could have a game where, AJ Brown and one of the pass catchers like Devontae Smith or Goddard and with Hurts completely go off. So, I mean, that's, again, different game script than people think, but something to consider. I'm having a hard time with the Eagles side because of Jalen Hurts' health and because he's just not passing the ball. I mean, you mentioned, I think you took the under on his yards. It's crazy. His completions and his pass attempts last week were 17.5 and 25.5. And of course, he didn't come close to either. They're lower this week. I think it's 16.5, and I'm guessing like 23.5. I don't have the temerity to even look at those over or under. So I'm not really betting anything Jalen Hurts related. I was on a show at 10 o'clock on the Early Edge today, and Mackenzie Brooks gave out Kenny Gainwell over 8.5 rushing yards. I do kind of like that look because as much as we're going to play Barkley and his rushing attempt prop is like 24.5, which is crazy. He's going to be on the field that much, running that much. I mean, he's going to need to get spelled here and there. And Gainwell against this rush defense makes plenty of sense for him to have 3 carries for 12 yards or more, something like that. So I do kind of like that Kenny Gainwell look. I think Dallas Goedert is super popular, and I totally get the rationale there.
He's banged up, though.
That's the thing. And also, we're not really getting a ton of value on the prop because kind of everybody's sort of been betting it. I think it's like 40 in some places. If anything, I would take A.J. Brown. I would also look at A.J. Brown first quarter stuff, A.J. Brown longest reception, because I will tell you this. This narrative is out there that Jalen Hurts, A, can't throw, and B, is injured, which means, it's going to be all Saquon Barkley. And what's Washington to do? Most likely just bring everybody up and not let Saquon Barkley beat them. The one thing you want to do as an offense under those circumstances is say to them, this is not the game you think it's going to be, or at least pretend it's not the game you think it's going to be. And you take a deep shot early to a Devontae Smith or more likely A.J. Brown. It doesn't even have to be a deep shot. Could be just kind of a quick slant to just make sure everybody understands Jalen Hurts can throw the ball. So I would actually look at A.J. Brown in general, but I think A.J. Brown first quarter, especially since he's the guy that cries for the ball more than any other person on that offense, him getting involved early makes a ton of sense to me.
A.J. Brown, first quarter receiving yards, 9.5 over.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Yep.
All right, so we got Crowder, A.J. Brown. I don't know what to do with the Gainwell stuff. I guess if it's super cold. I mean, but Barkley basically stayed on the field the entire time last week. Gainwell had 1 rush. He would have hit his over on it, and he had 1 catch. That was it for Gainwell.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is a slightly worse rush defense. So which means maybe that one, I mean, he's not going to get 1 rush, but I think it's easier to lean on a backup running back when you know that he's more likely to get like some more yards against Washington than versus like the Rams, for example, because he still could get you in 2nd and short or 3rd and short with his run. So I still think Gainwell's, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I'm willing to bet that, but I don't hate it at all. I mean, they are going to run the ball.
All right. How about Brian Robinson under 9.5 rushing attempts?
So it depends on the game script.
I agree.
Washington,
so we have to play with that, right?
Yeah. So the thing is, they're going to want to run the ball. I mean, because keeping that defense on the field is going to be a priority. They tend to do that with the short area passing game. I don't really have an opinion on the 9.5. I think that is a really efficient line. And I do think they want to get Robinson going. And I got to admit, he looked a little better last week than I thought he was going to. I think his rushing yardage line is like 36, 37.5. I just think those lines are super efficient. I think that's a stay away for me.
See, I went unders last week and got just blown up on him because he went off. I feel like I should go with my gut and go back to he just hasn't been good since he returned from that injury, except for last week.
And that front four should, especially without Sam Cosmi. So that like Trent Scott's going to be the backup right guard, and he has experience. He's a veteran. He's played. I believe he is the player that caught Jaden Daniels' first touchdown pass week 3 against the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football, which is just kind of a fun thing to say. But like without Sam Cosmi, this running game's going to be an issue. So if I was going to lean anywhere, it would 100% be on the unders. I don't know about rush attempts versus yards is the thing. I think under on yards is probably just as good as rush attempts, but I think either is a pretty good look.
All right, so we'll go Brian Robinson under 37.5 rushing yards. I was looking for Jaden Daniels sacks taken, but they don't have that yet. That's always one I really enjoy to play, especially in these games where quarterbacks don't want to make the bad throw, where they'll just kind of go down with the ship and live to fight another day.
Yeah. Did you add on to that card? Because I don't know how many legs you're trying to add. Is Ertz on there in terms of any overs for him?
No, I have bad vibes on Ertz.
Fair enough. I think my thought there is, and I don't know who's going to be covering him necessarily, but with Nakobe Dean out, it is kind of a potential issue for that defense. And I would think that Ertz would be able to take advantage of that.
I would think so too, but he looks so slow last week. I mean,
he is slow. He's always been slow.
He looks noticeable. I mean, Kelsey looked slow last week and went absolutely off. So that doesn't mean anything. But I could see Bates being more involved because there's only so many options that Washington can throw at you. That becomes sort of the issue. That's why Daniels needs to be so dynamic out of the backfield, or they need to establish anything on the ground. Because if not, all they're going to do is basically either play a man high, man low on McLaurin and make sure he doesn't get loose deep down the field, or they just put someone on him and to lock him up. On the other side, you take your chances with Brown or Zacchaeus, and that leaves the Crowder element open, the Ertz element open. Then you need someone to spy Eckler out of the backfield and make sure that Daniels can't get loose. Like if you're not able, like you can take away 3 of those things, you can kind of funnel everything to the same spot, and then you can have like your worst defenders just stand there and make an easy tackle.
Yeah, I will say this with Zach Ertz. Like Zach Ertz reminds me, I mean, we can think of like old white tight ends, right? Like Jason Witten sort of at the end of his career where he was not super fast. Obviously, well, he wasn't fast at all, but like he had a way of running his route where he would wall off the defender with his body and he had such strong hands. I do think Zach Ertz is kind of that dude. So, I mean, I think especially with the pass rush and the offensive line probably having some issues, I think we're going to see a lot of Jaden Daniels kind of getting it out quick. So that's my argument for Zach Ertz, at least.
All right, I'm going to play this one. So underdog, code Mayo. If you use code Mayo right now and you're new at underdog, and you can get that, they'll just be in the link as we go through it. You'll take this up from 6-1 to 10-1 if you would like to. Jamison Crowder higher than 8.5 yards on his longest reception. A.J. Brown higher than 9.5 first quarter receiving yards. And Brian Robinson lower than 37.5 rushing yards. 150 pays $900. And I'm throwing that into the chat right now. If people want to tail along, or just go pure fade on it. Do whatever you want with it. But you will get your deposit bonus of up to $1,000 within that. And you will get the free pick to go along with it as well. So that's the move I'm going. Let's switch to golf. Actually, give me a prediction for both the games before we switch to golf.
So I will go. I'm going to go Bills win outright. So I'm going to take the +2 or +1.5. I think the Bills win outright in obviously like a close game, like something like a 24-23 type situation. With Washington, I'm going to do the Mike Leone thing and just go homer here. I'm going to say Washington wins. I think if Washington can get to 24 or 27, they can win the game. So I'm going to say Washington 27, Eagles 23.
Who would you rather see Washington play? Buffalo or KC?
Well, I mean, everybody's going to say Buffalo, including me. I'm just not interested in seeing KC. It's fatigue. I mean, I don't hate the team or anything. I do think Buffalo, like I thought Buffalo or Baltimore, like those were like two deserving, it's their turn type of teams. I think Buffalo's a great city that kind of deserves another Super Bowl appearance. And so I'm rooting for Buffalo there.
All right. Farmers Insurance Open is currently going on. The end of round 2 after being delayed on Thursday is just finishing up right now. And it does seem like some of my long shots are in the mix here. We got Wacky Valimaki at 1,250 to 1 T25. That's nice to have in the mix. Everyone's kind of here because you got Lonto and Ludwig up top because Ludwig struggled down the stretch, ended up 3 over. Someone, a creative player named Danny Walker is in 3rd place by himself at 500. Then you got Hayden Springer, Goddard, Sung Jae's lurking. He's at 4 under as well. But if 6 under is in the lead, that means we currently have 55 players within 6 strokes at the lead at one of the hardest courses on tour and one of the longest courses on tour. So I feel like this is wildly up for grabs.
I totally agree. I had 4 guys on my outright card, and I don't think any of them are going to win, to be honest. I didn't take Ludwig at plus 900. I took Jason Day, who's currently 35-1, which is interesting. I took Thomas Dietrich, who I got at 65-1 or 70. Thomas Dietrich is 40-1 now. I also took Thigala, who really has no chance to win, and was probably a bad pick.
Listen, I ended up having to switch to him in my one and done because I had Willie Z. So I had to go on to Thigala. And he's not out of it by any means. He's currently he's at even. The evens are in play, honestly. Like you just need to have that round at the South Course and hope that the leader just has a break even round kind of thing. Like shoot a 71, you shoot a 67. Like 67s are going to be available for someone in the field that if you can figure out who that's going to be, I would lean bomber heavy. Like even someone like Taylor Moore, who I did bet before the tournament, he's at +1. He's like 400-1 right now. I just even to look at his top 20 odds, they're 5-1. Like that's somewhat intriguing to me.
So I before I came onto the show, I took a long shot. I took Sam Stevens at 55-1, who I liked pre-tournament as well, not really as an outright, more in DFS. I do think the idea that Sam Stevens closes in a situation where like Ludwig or Sungjae or Hideki are at the top it sounds kind of silly, but we've seen silly stuff like that before. I thought Sam Stevens was a pretty good course fit. So that was the long shot I took. But this probably comes down to, in my opinion, obviously Ludwig, Sungjae, and Hideki. I think 1 or 2 of those 3 will be in the mix on Sunday.
I can most definitely see that. Where's Hideki right now? Hideki's only at 1 under though. He's 5 shots back and he's the 3rd favorite. Like, those are bad odds.
Those are 100%. I would not take. 20-1 is not terrible, right?
No, sorry. He's 22-1 is the best number you can find on him right now. But like, I don't know, this course kind of as much as this pains me to say, Goddard I think might be a play at 30-1.
That's crazy. So I hear you. I'd rather take Sam Stevens at 55-1.
I mean, at least Goddard has closed on the PGA Tour before.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But other than that, like you can just kind of scroll down this list and make a case for a lot of guys. Like even someone like Thigala, who's 6 strokes back, is at 80-1 right now. Like that doesn't feel long enough. But Paul, you wanted to say something?
My ladder of the week.
Ladder of the week. All right, let's hear it.
All right. So he only round 1, he played at the South Course. He was gangbusters. Awesome. First in the field and approach this week. Other stats all sucked. Yesterday at the North Course, he was horrible. TPC, I know it's not a TPC.
TPC Lee?
KH Lee's T25.
Oh
I believe like his top 20 is like 3-1 or something like that. I'm not looking at it right this second.
Noted winner on the PGA Tour, KH Lee, currently 250-1 to win this tournament.
Number 1 in approach.
Well, see that
it's 1 round, so it could go horribly, but he played this course. Or he played the South Course very well in his 1 round so far. So maybe it's his happy place.
It might be, but I would say that some of the stats are going to be off, mainly because there was so much wind yesterday and half the field had to play at the South Course, which made it harder than it even did day 1. Although I was trying to figure out what made I had to go back and like look at it. It was the round isn't final yet, and I think the North Course got a bit easier this morning with less wind. But it was the first time ever the South Course played easier than the North Course, or at least most of the time it's like 2 to 3 shots easier at the North Course. And the wind yesterday although the courses are right next to each other, it was the North Course that got affected so much. I couldn't figure out why. And then I think it wasn't Max Homa. It was someone doing a walk and talk trying to describe, it was Damon maybe, of why that was going to be the case. And I guess it's the greens at the North Course are so much firmer and a different grass type that it affects the balls on the greens so much more with the wind.
Yeah, I heard Greg Ducharme say that yesterday as well. So it kind of makes sense. I was stunned by that stat comparison on the North and South Course. By the way, the first bet I made in this tournament was actually a fade on KH Lee. And again, it was pre-tournament, pre-flop. It was top Korean Sungjae Im, who currently, like the other 2 Koreans didn't make the cut, I don't think. So it's down to those 2. And I think KH Lee might have like a 1-shot lead on Sungjae, but Sungjae's currently minus 900 in that field. So I'm hoping KH Lee doesn't actually come close to winning this.
Sungjae's up by 3 strokes on KH Lee now.
Oh, he is? Okay. That's why it's minus 900. That makes sense.
Yeah, but there's other like random losers in this field, like Will Gordon. Like if I'm going to take a chance on someone, like that's why I don't mind your Sam Stevens call, with this because you just have to take a guy who mashes the ball off the tee, who's like within striking distance. And Gordon's one of the bigger hitters in the field. Like you have your Eric Coles and your Wes Bryans and your Harris Englishes. Like those guys can win, obviously. But I would just rather default to the guy who hits the ball a mile. That's why I like Goddard.
So, and Sam Stevens' long iron play has been decent as well, and his around the green play. Like he checks all the boxes other than the box of like, can this guy actually win? Because the answer to that is 99% of the time no. But we've seen Ludwig and guys like Sung Jae falter on the weekend before. So I just don't think it's outside the realm of possibility when you're looking at a 55-1.
Oh, absolutely. Like if anyone thinks that Ludwig is some sort of elite closer, he ain't, and neither is Sung Jae. The other one who is sitting there too is Vegas, who has the great course history. He's just 2 under. He wins. So one thing he can do is win.
Yeah, he can. I was on him his last win. I'm trying to remember. That was in July, and
3M.
I can't remember. There we go. Yeah, 3M. And that was such a huge hit for me. But man, down the stretch of that tournament, it looked like he was going to give that up. I believe to Max Grazerman. There was a couple of guys that were kind of like on his tail. And I feel like Max Grazerman was one of them. But long story short, I hear you on Vegas. For some reason, I'm dubious about him closing again. But that's not a bad call.
Yeah. The other thing to look at too, like I have Ludwig on my outright card, so I'm not really looking to add too much. But John in the chat says, any showdown tips for today? Now I'm out of the showdown game after the first 2 rounds of I am like the reason that I deposited the extra money and played it so hard because there is such a big advantage of playing the North course over the South course. And while 85% of the people did it in round 1, myself included, just 6 guys from the North course, there's still ways that you can go about doing that and finding just different tricks. And my trick was I capped all my lineups with $4,800. Like I wouldn't go over that. Therefore, everyone had the same combination of Ludwig, and it wasn't Finau, it wasn't Hideki. They both played the South. Whoever the top, Keegan, it would have been Willie Z, but he ended up withdrawing. But like those guys just all got paired together at the very top. And then, my lineups were just so much more unique. And it didn't work yesterday because of the win, but that's the way I was looking for it. So any bet on golf besides Stan Stevens, or that's what you're rolling with?
So unfortunately, matchups are now because of what happened with round 2. So I'm actually waiting for matchups to come out. I don't play a lot of showdown, and when I do, I'm pretty terrible at it.
I got some matchups for you here. You ready?
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
Eric Cole or Frankie Cappan?
I mean, what's the?
It's all these are minus 112 on both sides. They're taking a bunch of big right now.
Yeah, I don't love. I mean, I would go with Eric Cole, but I don't love his game here necessarily.
Sam Stevens or Harris English?
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, geez, Harris English is such a pro. I'd have to stay away from that. I do lean Stevens on the South course, but I'd stay away.
Grazerman or Thigala?
It feels like the same guy, except Grazerman can putt, or sometimes. Okay. That's a stay away. Go ahead.
Patrick Rogers or Charlie Hoffman?
Hoffman.
Really?
I think Rogers is a good course fit. Hoffman's been playing really well.
I agree. But Rogers at this course, I like more than Hoffman.
Yeah. Is that minus 112 each way as well?
It is. I'm going to give Patrick Rogers minus. Okay, we'll go head to head. We'll figure out some sort of stakes for this. Okay. I will take Rogers. You take Hoffman. I like that side of it. If you want to play Paul's ladder, it's KH Lee ladder, and he's up against Matty Schmidt today, and he's only minus 106. That's actually one that's juiced towards Matty Schmidt, so watch out for KH Lee in that regard. Sia, we'll check you out live. What time is it live with Meg today?
5:30 on Monumental Sports Network, which admittedly is mostly a regional show, so it's more for the DC, Maryland, Virginia, unless you got like satellite TV and stuff like that. But you can also check me out at Sportsline, Early Edge every morning at 10 in the morning and places like that.
Big V says, don't sleep on Jake Knapp. Mash is at 3rd last year. I'm not sleeping on Jake Knapp. Like, trust me on Jake Knapp. But I do have a parlay of him, Valimaki, and Pottinger to all finish inside the top 40 for like $3,500, which I'm very excited about. Let's go hit that one. Wouldn't that be nice? You can find all of these stats on Fantasy National, fantasynational.com/Mayo to get yourself 20% off. Just make it easy on yourself if you want to get into the golf game. And code Mayo at Underdog right now. You can follow Sia at Sia Nejad on X and me at the PME. You smash the like, you share the show around, and I will see you next time.